Okay, so when we last left our new authors table, we had created several of the columns, but I said before we save this and actually commit that table to the database, let's talk about rows and how to uniquely identify rows. It's very possible that two authors could have the exact same name, right? John Smith is a very common name. I'm sure there have been multiple authors over time that have had the same name, John Smith. And we may have a hard time differentiating one John Smith from another John Smith if we didn't have some other key piece of information to differentiate those two John Smiths in our database. And so the way that we can do that is by adding what's called a primary key constraint on a column that will be guaranteed to be unique. All right, and there's a couple of different ways to go about this. We're going to take the most simple approach first of all. I'm going to create a identifier, a column in every row that will have some unique value that will uniquely identify one author from another author, and we're not going to rely on things that could be duplicates like a name or even the date added or even a biography potentially. So we're going to need something unique. That means it's going to be a construct of our minds and of the database and not something that's based in reality per se. So we're going to create an ID. So I'm going to I'm going to actually select the name column. I'm going to right click to the right hand side and I want to insert a column. It should create a whole new little row in this editor grid that we have here that I can then type into. I'm going to call this author ID. Okay, so notice that I used a capital I in ID. And also notice that I've not used spaces in between the various column names. I can, but that's generally frowned upon. You generally want to use this casing of what's called like camel case with a capital A, capital I. Every time there's a new word, capitalize that letter, the first letter in the word. Okay. I've also seen ID with a capital D, but let's stick with I, capital I, lowercase d. And now I want to choose the data type. And in this first case, I'm going to choose an integer. And an integer can allow us to create potentially millions of different authors in our database. We shouldn't need it, but we're going to use the integer anyway, and we're not going to allow any nulls. All right. The next step is for us to ensure that whenever we insert an author into the database, a new number is automatically assigned to that given author. A new number. And so what we want to do is scroll down to this identity specification where it says identity specification. We want to hit that little arrow, the little chevron, and we're going to change is identity from no, which is the default, to yes. This will open up the identity increment and identity seed. So here we're going to start with the number 1, then for the first author, number 2 for the second author, 3 for the third author. If I delete the third author, then the next author that we add to the database will not be 3, it'll be 4. So 3 is out of the mix from that point on. But the seed is the starting point. We could start this at 1,000. So the first author we insert would be 1,000, the next one would be 1,001, 1,002, and so on. But let's just stick with the number 1. The next is the number to increment by. So we could actually increment by tens, or if we plan on using this identity value for something like ordering, then we might choose to say, let's say the first author is 1, then the next one's 11, then the next one's 21, so that in the future if we wanted to add some authors in between those two and use it to order the authors on some other criteria other than their name, we could use the author ID for that purpose as well. But we're going to leave it at 1 in this case. All right. So we should be setting our is identity to yes, our identity increment to 1, and our identity seed to 1. All right. So that's the first part of this. Now we have ensured that every new author that will be added to our database will have an author ID. The other thing that we need to do, however, is to specify that this is a special column in our table that we should apply a constraint to it that should be unique, and it should be considered the primary way in which we differentiate one author from another. So what we'll do is right-click on this little row in our designer here at the top for the author ID and set this as the primary key. And by doing so, you'll see that there's a little key icon off to the left-hand side. So again, what this says is two things. First of all, as I understand authors, I want to only talk about authors in terms of their identifier, their ID, this author ID column. And then the second thing is that I can't artificially insert two authors with the same author ID value. So if I were to choose to insert one author and it automatically gives it the author number 1, I could try to manually add another author with the value 1. If this did not have the primary key constraint that we've just added to it, then we could have two authors in the database with the same author ID, which would obviously defeat the purpose for the identifier in the first place. So that is the purpose of the primary key. You'll see how primary keys are used to relate tables together through a primary key, foreign key relationship in an upcoming lesson. And then it'll become clearer why we might want or need to declare this from SQL Server's perspective. Again, this is just a way to ensure the integrity of the data that we're putting in the charge of SQL Server so that it can make sure that it's always accurate. And part of that accuracy is ensuring that no two authors have the same ID. Okay? So at this point, we're done making the modifications, and we'll go ahead and save our table by clicking the little Save button here on the standard toolbar. I want to give the table a name, and we're just going to call this Authors, and I'm going to follow a convention where I'm going to use the plural form of whatever we're saving, in this case, Authors, all right, as opposed to just Author. Click OK. And now if we expand out the Tables node, we should see dbo.authors. We'll talk about dbo. In just a little while, but this is basically who owns the database. In this case, it's just owned by a generic DBO entity. You kind of think of this in terms of namespaces. We can use this to help refine our permissions by changing this from DBO to something else, maybe the department in which this particular table is intended to be used. There are lots of ways to use it. We'll talk about that concept later. Let's not get bogged down on that right now. But what we can do at this point is actually close this tab in SQL Server Management Studio, and then in the very next lesson, we're going to look at how to insert data into our new authors table. All right, so we'll see you there. Thanks.